corn crop. I didn't forget about you. Today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite historical figures, Vercingetorix. Hey look, he's on the cover of a book. Anyway, History Channel earlier this year aired a show called Barbarians Rising. And in that show, they feature several tribal, quote-unquote, tribal barbarian leaders who stood against the invasion of Rome. They covered Hannibal, which was like 247 BC-ish. They covered Spartacus, Arminius, it's one of my favorites, Boudica, another favorite, Alaric, and Variathus. And if you're a fan of Vikings, which also airs on History Channel, the same guy who plays Torsten, also known as Geoffrey Hall, also plays Variathus. Now, to kind of get going with Vercingetorix, your little background is he's a Gaulish chieftain of the Arverni tribe, and his father actually started this process of trying to unite all of the Gaulish tribes, except his father was a little more ambitious, so to speak, because he wanted to be king of all the Gaulish tribes, and the Gaulish tribes were having none of that and killed him. They ejected Vercingetorix from Gergovia, which was kind of their capital city, walled hill fort kind of thing, and Vercingetorix went out into the countryside and put together an army, and he was 13. So I think that's why he was just ejected and not killed. So either people felt sorry for him, or they agreed with his vision, what have you, so he created an army. He went back to Gergovia, he took it by force, and crowned himself tribal chieftain of the Arverni tribe. So, now this is all happening in winter time, and in the wintertime, the Roman army just kind of hunkered down and waited until, you know, the spring and summer to run their campaigns. So, enter Julius Caesar, my favorite friend Julius Caesar, who's a tool, I think. Anyway, but, you know, with Rome, you gotta kind of take them with a grain of salt because they were, you know, so technologically advanced, and their military was so organized. You know, you kind of have to admire them for that. Regardless, so Caesar's over in Cisalpine Gaul, which is northern Italy, kind of bedding down for the winter, and then he gets word that Gergovia has been taken. So it's like, oh crap, what does he do? You know, he can either march over there and take care of the problem right now, before it becomes a bigger problem, you know, before Vercingetorix gets a real foothold in the area, or he can just sit there and then hope for the best in the spring. So he was like, you know what, I'm gonna go over there, I'm gonna take care of this kid right now. So he starts, you know, marching his troops out of Cisalpine Gaul, and on the way, because it's the winter, he's having to hit these villages and take their food because he doesn't have any food. And so Vercingetorix gets wind of this and is like, no, we're not doing this. So he goes out after Caesar, and they meet up, forgive me, another pronunciation, Noviodunum. So Caesar kind of kicks his ass there. And so Vercingetorix then is going to retreat back to Gergovia, but he has to cross the river Allier, what is central France now. And so what he does is he crosses the river and then he burns the bridge. And so then Caesar's stuck on the other side, trying to get across, so he's going up and down the river trying to find a bridge or a place to ford the river, and so Vercingetorix is going up and down the other side of the river, blocking him off, burning bridges, you know, keeping him from getting across. And so, you know, Caesar's like, I don't got time for this. I don't got time for this shit. So one night, he sends most of his, you know, I would say about 2/3 of his soldiers off to continue up the river to find a bridge. If they find a bridge, cross it, whatever. And he keeps some of his soldiers back, and he builds a bridge. Well, Vercingetorix takes the bait, and Caesar builds a bridge, gets across the river, and then starts booking it to Gergovia. Well, then Vercingetorix sees the other soldiers come back, and figures out what's going on, so then he books it to Gergovia. And this is the capital city of the Arverni tribe. So that's why it's important and why Vercingetorix feels comfortable going there. So when they get to Gergovia, Caesar notices that Gergovia is definitely the high ground. And he sees that there's a hillock nearby that if he can get that, he feels that he can then get Gergovia. So he takes that hillock, and Vercingetorix is happily inside Gergovia, and Caesar realizes he's not going to be able to keep this siege going on forever in the middle of winter, so he decides, hey, if I send out word to the Aedui tribe, which has historically been allies to Caesar, then they can come here and they can help me, we'll draw him out, and then we'll slaughter him. So Caesar sends word to the Aedui tribe, which he doesn't know that Vercingetorix got to them. So Caesar starts, this attack, this frontal attack, which what's supposed to happen is his soldiers are supposed to attack and then retreat, drawing Vercingetorix out. Well, in this time period, there's no radios, there's no phones, there's no way for him to communicate with his soldiers other than trumpets and flags. And if somebody's not paying attention, they don't get the message. So they go up there and they're doing a frontal assault on the hill fort of Gergovia, and they don't get the message. So they just keep going at it. And the Aedui tribe shows up, sees the Romans, attacks them. So Caesar's like, what the hell is going on? My soldiers are being attacked by my allies. Vercingetorix is on the high ground and he can see what's going on. And he's like, oh, perfect timing. So he sends his cavalry out and they break the Roman lines. So then Caesar has to retreat back into the Aedui territory where he can find some of the tribes that are allied with, or some of the tribesmen that are still allied with him. So this was one of two failures in Caesar's military history, or losses. So that's pretty interesting for a 13-year-old kid. Kicked Caesar's ass there. So anyway, they go through the summer kind of having skirmishes here and there, and that, Rome's easily, keeping up with things because they have food. Well, when it starts getting into fall, Caesar starts running out of food. And when that happens, Vercingetorix like, hey, scorched earth policy. So he starts burning his own towns, his own, people's stuff. Because, an army travels on their stomach. So if Caesar can't get food, he can't keep coming after them. And he can't keep up the fight. So, as my friends and I like to say, the one damn town. There was one damn town that refused to burn. Avaricum would not burn the town. They had natural defenses and defenses they had built, and they said they'd be fine, and Vercingetorix should have burned them anyway, but he didn't, and this gave Caesar enough food, enough forage to keep coming. And so Vercingetorix meets up with Caesar, Gallia Narbonensis, and unbeknownst to Vercingetorix, Caesar has joined up with Titus Libienus from Rome, who's another Roman leader, and he's also further strengthened his troops with Germanic mercenaries, specifically cavalry. Now, the Germanic cavalry and the Celtic cavalry were superb. They kicked the crap out of the Romans right and left, so putting up two great cavalries against each other. So when Vercingetorix meets up with Caesar, he gets his ass handed to him. So then he retreats to Alesia. Now, Alesia is absolutely fascinating, and I will probably make just a video covering Alesia. A lot of shit went down, a lot of bad shit went down there. However, Vercingetorix withdraws there, and nearly overnight, because Caesar follows him, and nearly overnight they build 24 siege towers in a trench that's 20 feet deep with perpendicular sides, along with bulwarks and turrets, and just they completely surround Alesia. It's complete siege warfare at this point, and Vercingetorix is kind of fucked. he sends out riders to other Gaulish tribes to try to get them to come and help him. And it does work. They do come, but they take a while to deliberate and decide if they're actually going to come to his aid. Meanwhile, he's stuck in Alesia, starving, and so he gets the idea of sending out the women and the children and the sick in hopes that Rome will take them as prisoners and feed them. And that way he would have more rations for his men if they didn't have these other people eating them. So this is where things get not so good. Some accounts said that they cannibalized their own people, and other accounts say that he sent them out and they were in the gap between Alesia and Rome, and they killed them or left them to languish there and die because, you know, there was a no-win situation. And in this instance, unfortunately, the soldiers were much more important than your regular average folk. Regardless, the other Gaulish generals come to his aid, but unfortunately they cannot coordinate an attack sufficiently strong enough to drive away Rome, or to, you know, to take out Caesar's men. And unfortunately, Vercingetorix has to give himself up. He gives himself and all of his people up. They're enslaved and taken as spoils of war. I'm sure they're slaves back in Rome. Vercingetorix, however, goes to prison in Rome, and he's in Rome for 5 years. And I'm not really sure if this was planned or something that happened, but he was pulled out of prison and strangled to death on the steps of the Senate. Now, maybe he wasn't covered in the show Barbarians Rising because of, you know, his campaign wasn't long enough. It had a bittered end. It was a dismal failure because at this point, that was the last hurrah for the Gaulish. At that point, they just buckled down and, you know, quietly, I mean, they had a couple of other uprisings, but they just kind of buckled down and allowed Rome to rule them. That was it, you know, after trying to unite all the tribes, which he was almost successful. I mean, he was pretty close. So, with all that being said, you might be wondering where I learned all that stuff. And I think the first book I read that had Vercingetorix in it was this, called Druids. And it doesn't focus on Vercingetorix. It focuses on a druid character named Ainvar. And Vercingetorix is kind of secondary in this story. The next book I read was The Conquest of Gaul, and there's also Caesar's Gaulic Wars that I'll talk about Vercingetorix. There's actually a couple of good documentaries on Alesia itself. It's quite fascinating, just the fact that the Romans built, nearly overnight, built all of the siege works. And there's a band who, near and dear to my heart, Helvetii. I couldn't find their album. Helvetios, where they sing about the siege of Alesia, and the whole album is about Caesar coming and taking over and everything. It's, I think, a really good album. It's my absolute favorite album of theirs. So I highly recommend going and checking it out. Yeah, that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I apologize for my crappy pronunciation skills. So with that, I hope you have a good night and take care of yourself.